Tell us, in terms of trends and innovations that you saw, what is being done well? Where are companies that you work with enhancing L&D? And just tell us a bit more about Morehouse as well, please.
Yeah, of course. So I've been working in the learning space for over 10 years, and I'm genuinely delighted to be seeing so much current interest in the future of L&D across the market. And particularly as we know, usually in times of economic downturn, L&D is one of the first things to go, and that doesn't seem to be the case this time. So that's fantastic. And this session isn't necessarily for me to talk to about the impact of the pandemic, but I don't think any of us can get away from that at the moment. That's had a huge impact over the last year or so. But there have been some wider themes growing in organizations over the years as well. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about the things that I'm seeing, some of those trends, and where I think and hope we're going, as well as some of the conversations that we're actively having with people too. So I'm going to talk to a couple of different points. I'll add to the point around the opportunities of online learning, the importance of building learning cultures, that's cropped up already, and then the rise in individual and self-learning as well. So I think over the last year, been characterized obviously by online learning, and a point we've already made is how that has accelerated our view of the benefits and the opportunities. It was very easy for people to say before that it wasn't good enough or it didn't do the job, and unfortunately we've all been forced to learn that a lot of the time that isn't the case now. As we're looking at kind of going back to whatever normal is going to be, or a hybrid way of working, organizations are starting to look at how do we take what's the best from this situation and enhance those learning experiences. So I thought I'd talk about two different training projects that I've been involved in over the last year, because it's quite interesting to compare the two. They both utilize blended learning, but in different ways. So the first one started pre-COVID. It was a systems implementation rollout, and they were very clear that hands-on classroom training was the way that they wanted to go with that. They didn't have an e-learning option in place. Now, the reason for that was actually more to the point made earlier around the impact of social learning. The users of this system wouldn't all have been using it in the same way. So they didn't want the point of the sessions to be to tell them the knowledge around how to use it. It was much more about them understanding how they would integrate that into their jobs. COVID hit. We had to move everything online. We ended up getting great feedback. It did go really well, but we had to do a lot of work about how we could replicate that piece around that social learning element, and trying to get the best out of things like online forums to get people discussing things together. The second project had blended learning included from the start. So they wanted an e-learning module to supplement classroom training. So that was, as Mike had said, something that people could familiarize themselves with upfront. So to get the kind of basics, I guess, out of the way and everybody on the same page, but also something that people could go back to and learn in their own time. And one of their key drivers for this was a very high number of users. So they were looking very much at all these different learning styles and how we could tap into both. So I think what's really interesting is they both said hands-on classroom training is the best way to learn a new system. And I would tend to agree, but both utilized, whether through choice or not at the beginning, different ways of online learning to add to that. And both would agree that added very much to the experience. Now, obviously blended learning isn't new, but I do think this is something that's going to continue to grow as the years go on. So looking at learning cultures, and this is something that we've been actively exploring with clients and how they can build this in their organization. So without going into kind of a definition, because I don't think there really is one, what we at Morehouse mean by a learning culture is, I guess, a shared understanding across an organization of the importance of learning, and that it's something that's embedded and continual and ongoing, and not something that just happens as and when. So we've been spending some time working with a particular organization on this challenge. And they've done a really good job of getting senior leadership buy-in to this. Anything, we've all learned lessons before, anything with a cultural steer, you kind of need that top-down input, and had agreed with them a sort of series of initiatives to put in place. And these were things like, broadening out content, encouraging people to take ownership of their learning, putting in place protected learning time. And when launched, it didn't quite land as well as they thought. Nothing bad, it's just it wasn't quite taken up by people. I think the key lesson learned for them was really that bottom-up piece as well as that top-down. You really need to not just allow people to do this, not just give them the time to spend on their learning, but really work with them to get them to understand the benefit for them. Another key challenge was getting them to interact with that learning themselves. A lot of people are used to having learning curated for them. People are told what courses they should go on when and given the materials. And actually now, obviously, we're seeing that people are much more able and much more willing to access content themselves. So we're trying to use this momentum and encourage our clients to build on this and say, actually, it's about the shift of thinking about learning to be something that's always available, something you can dip into, as Steve spoke to earlier. You know, it's at a point of need, not just something that's provided to you as and when. And then the final point, and very related to this, is that rise in individual and self-learning. So pre-pandemic, there was a lot of trends that was fueling this as well. So we are seeing not necessarily the eradication of, but definitely a reduction in the idea of jobs for life. It's relatively easier to move between careers, and the pace of change means that skills need to be refreshed quite a lot. But obviously over the last year, we are also seeing that people are wanting to develop themselves. And this can often just be for their own self-interest as much as anything else. So some organizations are actively embracing this. So we're seeing people moving away from the idea of things like core curriculums and trying to open up a broader menu almost for people to choose from. One in particular we're talking to at the moment around introducing a self-learning approach. So they're setting up a large hub of materials and encouraging people to pick and choose from them as they want to. What I think is so interesting about this, and is very different from that sort of traditional approach where you build your current skill set so you can get better at your current job, get promoted and move up the ladder, is they're actually encouraging people to look directly at skills outside of those they need for their role. And as part of this, also encouraging people to look at whether there might be different areas of the business that they want to work in. A key challenge of this is getting that big suite of materials together. And I think that's almost easier and harder at the moment. I think it's easier to find things that you can access and that you can pull together, but it's a big job trying to keep that current and trying to keep that in place as well. People are just more used to having things at their fingertips. And I think what's really important is to not just look at, you know, what can we replicate online, what can we make available to people anywhere, anytime, but how can we supplement this with articles or videos or TED Talks or forums. So a couple of things there that I just wanted to kind of go through. And to sum up, as I said, we're really excited about these conversations that we're having, the changes that people are making to L&D, because we genuinely think this will improve learning experiences. Obviously accelerated greatly by the pandemic, but also bringing to the fore some of those other themes. And really what we are focusing on working with clients on is let's build on what we've learned over the last year, and let's bring it in alongside those face-to-face elements that we've all missed and that we know are hugely important, because done properly, incorporating online learning into current models and wider models can significantly enhance that experience, and not just having greater access to things, but also encouraging people to rethink learning and that idea of it being continual and something that they can build for themselves, giving them more space to learn in the ways that best work for them, which will benefit organizations because you can tap more and more into people's potential. So hopefully a bit of food for thought there and some ideas around what we're seeing in the market. And we're really keen, obviously, to hear any other thoughts or examples of where people are doing things differently as well.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lisa. And I think you touched on a really critical topic around culture that helps retention and talent promotion as well. I think, you know, for many companies, that's an area of challenge where today's generation looks at careers, you know, in a company which is 3 to 4 years, 5 years, and if you're in the 6th year, that's actually a great place to be. So I think that investment that companies are making towards L&D, especially in a remote environment, supports this kind of longer-term high talent retention as well. Before I go further to Rajesh, someone tell us a little bit in terms of, you know, when you think about this kind of retention of talent, especially using L&D as an area of focus, what have companies like yourselves done in this area, in a brief note, to say, you know, this helps retention and as well as talent mobility within the organization?
Thanks, Paras. I think it was great to listen to Lisa and you know, the other panelists around this space. A couple of things. I think I'm very fortunate to be part of an organization for whom learning is not an option. It's in our DNA. And as you no Standard Chartered invest heavily in terms of building people capability around that. So we call ourselves actually the people capability team. So we are no longer learning and development. I think our step is one notch up in terms of really looking at building people's capability and not just restrict towards training and learning element around it. Coming specific to your question, I think it's an interesting journey that we are into as well. I think so we are in a fast-paced space in terms of really transforming the way we create a culture in the organization, and our partnership around different businesses is towards to create a more sustainable change management concept around it, and we believe that learning or what, as I said, the people capability elements are about really democratizing it across the organization to drive this. So the most important thing that we believe is that the purpose for which you set up this is important to define in the beginning. And when we looked at our organization, we are an organization of close to 100,000 employees across 64 markets. We are dynamic. From a business perspective as well as our scalability perspective, and to really look at how do we do our talent process and how do we help them. We have taken three simple steps, and I know I just wanted to kind of share that with you. The first important thing that we have looked is that we started looking at the way people learn differently from at an individual level. So we do not give anything that is one size fits all. So we moved out of that long back, which is a significant move towards really not just personalizing, but as I said, it's democratizing learning a bit more detailed on that space. Number two is to really look at the partnership that you do with the ecosystem in bringing this out, because developing talent or supporting talent is no longer one function, one unit responsibility, right? You need to really look at how do you use your ecosystem. When I say ecosystem, I'm talking about using technology. For example, I'm talking about really using our new ways of working mechanism to really bring that to life. So our partnership with the ecosystem internally is extremely at the high in our agenda to really drive some of these things. And the third thing is what we believe is that we need to create the difference through the experience and not through the content. So our belief is your differentiator is the experience you provide and not the content that drives that experience. I think from our perspective, we have really gone deep in terms of looking at these three things at the heart of what we are doing to really drive, not just from a specific talent perspective, but as an organizational cultural DNA perspective.
Thank you, Suran. That was some really interesting thoughts, and I think for the audience listening in, it's about each company is going to try and look at aspects, that create a culture that's consistent to what they've been building over the years, but using digitalization, using tools and assets that you come across while keeping people at the center of it has been probably the area of innovation that's been an area of focus. Rajesh, coming to you, as we talk about innovation, we're talking about trends in the space. What is being done, and are there examples and your experiences that you can share with us as well?
Yeah, thanks, Paras. I'll try to focus on topics that we're currently experiencing, but also topics that don't overlap much with what Lisa mentioned, because everything that she mentioned is actually extremely valuable. And also I have seen it as a user, but also in the bank as a group, we have been doing a lot of the same things that she has mentioned. So I think just to start with the overview, it's definitely seen, like everybody else mentioned, that there's a huge push post-pandemic on how do you look at learning and how do you sort of personalize it. And we have launched a lot of different modules, what we call microlearns. So because of the fact that we could have earlier, people sitting in one room for like a whole day, but the attention span, if you're online and also you're by yourself and let's say isolated, it's impossible to give someone, let's say, a 10-hour coursework, right? So how do you make them bite-sized chunks and microlearns and allow them to have that experience at their own speed? So that's one. And then the other thing is that there's obviously the usual topics as a bank that you have to train your staff in relation to compliance, in relation to let's say anti-bribery or things like that. So these are, let's say, around specific skills that is necessary for everyone. But there's also a lot of new skills that we have started focusing on, which have been a theme in the bank, but now all of these are also available digitally. So the skills that we have started, let's say, emphasizing more on is one is how do you look at customer or client experience, and what we mean by that is more and more we see that across the bank, and I mean corporate, retail, investment banking, the discussion has moved from face-to-face interactions and meetings, um, that how do we sort of like keep that physical and the online mode going, and what are the things to be mindful of. For example, we all jump from calls to different calls, and then if you have a client interaction, how do you be mindful of some of those interactions, what we would say, soft skills or things that are much easier to be mindful of when you're in a physical setting. And also when you talk of the online experience with the customer, like what do they see? Because the way you interact inside a bank is different than how the client perceives the bank, right? So there's an element of customer experience where we started focusing a lot on. One of the key targets also is what we call data fluency. So we have a lot of work that goes around using data as a underlying decision-making skill. And then how do we democratize that as a base, not necessarily to the depths of becoming a data scientist, but understanding why it's relevant, what can we do, and what's not possible, what's possible, so the basics. So that is something also that has been democratized in partnership with some companies, that is available to a lot of people, at least to do the basics. Then one of the other skills that we have, or at least something that we have wanted to make everyone aware of, is cybersecurity. The fact that everybody works from home, they access probably their laptops, etc., from different environments. How do we keep it safe for everyone, and also make them aware of what happens when they're not in, let's say, in an office firewall environment. And last but not the least, how do we keep that gatekeeper role going on from an operational risk management perspective? Because also the nature of risk and risk management has completely changed when you have like thousands of people working from home, right? So yeah, so bringing back those are more the, let's say, the job specific skills or content based skills. And there's definitely a huge focus on how do you keep your mental health and your well-being under control, or what sort of clues do you look after, or also how do you sort of learn to disconnect or sort of take breaks that are necessary. So there's also a lot of modules that we have launched now which are around personal well-being, family time, because also a lot of people have been taking care of kids or taking care of ill parents, etc. So how do you sort of balance, because there that boundary that was there between the work-life balance of office and home is completely changed now. So how do we make sure that people are cognizant of those?
That's fantastic, Rajesh. And it's great to hear about how companies are focusing not just on skill training, but also well-being as an area of interest, given that the lines across, the work-life balance has blurred so much, especially in global firms where people are working across geographies and trying to do more through this time. Nikhil, coming to you, and I know you've done a lot of work around this too. Learning has become a lot about personalization. It's become about, because learning is happening everywhere at today's time, and people want to upskill themselves as well than just the company. What kind of simulations or what kind of examples have you seen around innovative ways where people have done this?
I think, to me, for personalization is the answer. Specifically, is the answer when people. I think Lisa, for example, mentioned. People lose that sort of when you lose offline training, you lose, the the coffee break Eric, and I couldn't agree with her more. But I think the personalization is the answer why you should do this particular thing. Because this idea where people sit in one classroom, listen to sort of one content for all, one training for all, I think in e-learning and online learning, I think you can break that up, right? So personalization to me is the key reason why people should engage, among other things, should engage in the e-learning space. I think what I've seen people do extremely well is create sort of a lot of AI-based assessments. We have clients in Dubai who've done this, where they're able to literally take their entire organization, classify them into different skill gaps by domain, by leadership skills, and there are multiple ways to do that, and create curated learning paths for that. I think to me that's superbly powerful. I think as a user, if you're able to give me content that's relevant to me, up to my skill level, etc., and create a curated path for it, I think that to me is a big tick. So I think that could be in the form of domain, that could be in the form, to your point, Paras, you mentioned simulations, where earlier, for example, if you wanted to do a trade life cycle simulation, it's very difficult to do it in a classroom format. But now I can create a rapid tech tool around it, and we can actually see the trade move from one laptop to the other, and people appreciate that a lot more, etc. So I think it does open up different mediums to actually create personalized content that could be relevant over a long period of time. And also, I think the other thing it does is that, look, we all know that training doesn't stop at the classroom, right? Training sort of goes on after the classroom and after 6 months, after 12 months. And I think being able to curate this curate this journey, if you will, person by person, I think is extremely powerful.
That's a very good point. Learning is definitely a journey, and teams and companies are putting more emphasis on that.